Hello, this is Grant Hughes of Grant Hughes Investigates on YouTube. Please hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe. But hit that subscribe button right out of the gate, as that helps my channel, so thank you. Today's video is going to be regarding the Ka-Bar knife and various elements like when it was purchased, the timing of it, its significance in the case. We'll ask some questions. So obviously, Bryan Kohberger, now he's the killer in the Idaho 4 murder case. He admitted to it. He went into 1122 King Road at approximately, I would say, 4:10 or later, I think, is when he actually entered the house. His car parks around 4:08, but I think he went into the house around 4:10-ish, and then Xana Kernodle likely went into the kitchen to drop off the DoorDash delivery, but Kohberger was already upstairs and had likely killed Madison Mogen very quickly. And then Kaylee Goncalves woke up to that encounter and fought with Bryan Kohberger, and he absolutely was a barbarian towards Kaylee Goncalves. Just punched her in the face. There's marks on her mouth, broke out her teeth apparently. Stabbed her many times. So he went nuts up there, and I think that's when Xana Kernodle was down in the kitchen and heard the sound and went up to investigate, and then Kohberger saw her and then took off. Now, is that when he accidentally left the Ka-Bar knife there, or what, had he already placed it there because he was going to leave it there intentionally as a calling card? I guess we'll never get to know the answer to that question. So then Kohberger chases Xana Kernodle, encounters her near her bedroom likely, attacks her, and then attacks Ethan Chapin. Ethan Chapin just probably didn't wake up because he drank a lot and he was tired and asleep. They had been, if you remember, they'd been drinking like all day, and so he was probably absolutely exhausted like they all were, and that's why it was somewhat easy for Kohberger to dispatch all 4 of the students. So during that, there was a Ka-Bar knife sheath left on Madison Mogen's bed. All right, and then we take a look at this. In the probable cause document, it says, as I entered this bedroom, I could see 2 females in the single bed in the room. Both Goncalves and Mogen were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also noticed what appeared to be a tan leather sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had Ka-Bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. So they found that. They didn't know who it belonged to at the time. Then they were able to get a DNA sample from the underside of this button snap, so it would be like this, on the underside of that snap, either on this piece or that piece. And so that to me means that like the knife sheath was intentionally cleaned and that he just missed a spot on the underside of the button snap, and that's why I believe he left it there as a calling card. He was just careless and missed that one little spot on the knife sheath. And then they started looking into it on December 12, 2022. They applied for and were granted a warrant for sales record from Blue Ridge Knives for Ka-Bar KA1217S USMC fighting knife sheath, as shown purchase and quantities of the Blue Ridge knives from Ka-Bar, including on or about March 8, 2022, the purchase of 360 units, and on or about June 24, 2022, the purchase of 480 units. Blue Ridge Knives are a wholesaler for Ka-Bar knives and sheaths. SBI S.A. Douglas assisted in the service of the warrant to Elon Financial. So maybe, they were just trying to do a blanket request out there to see, where the purchases of these different Ka-Bar knives came from. And see, this is before they even knew who Kohberger was on December 12th. And on December 16th, they received an email from S.A. Douglas providing the data requested pursuant to the warrant. Now, what was on that? Did Kohberger's name ever pop up anywhere? If that's a wholesaler, then that means there's people on Amazon that are selling knives, and maybe they purchase from the wholesaler and then they mark it up, and then Kohberger would have purchased it on Amazon, and maybe through the wholesaler they can give a list of different people who sell the K-bar knives and who purchased them. So I would think that Kohberger's name was on a list somewhere during that time frame. In fact, it would have been on there because he purchased it around March 20th, and this is 3/08/2022. And then right here it says the following day on 11/14/2022, this is after the sheath was found, I learned that a sheath was found inside the apartment. The sheath was tan in color and had a Marine Corps Eagle globe and anchor symbol on the sheath. The words USMC were located under the EGA, and K-bar was above the EGA. I was asked to follow up with businesses in town to see if that particular knife was sold there. So immediately they were going around looking for K-bar knife, and that's how it made it into the media so quickly. The media was already talking about a K-bar knife because people were saying, hey, they came in here and they were looking for a K-bar knife. And that's why the Papa Rogers account likely thought that they must have found the sheath, because how would they know it was a K-bar knife and not some other type of a knife? They seem to specifically know that it was a K-bar knife. All right, and then right here it says, regarding the crimes of homicide or burglary occurring at 1122 King Road, this included temporal limitations based on the officer's investigation, which limited the search from March 20th, 2022 through March 30th, 2022. This is after they have already arrested Bryan Kohberger now. And then they had an idea of when he purchased the K-bar knife, and it's between March 20th and March 30th. Now, I'm sure law enforcement has the exact date, but we still haven't seen it yet, the exact date that the K-bar knife was purchased. So that right there shows you the time frame. March 20th to March 30th, 2022 is when he purchased the K-bar knife. And then again, this is more like they were trying to find out where maybe a K-bar knife came from. So it says on November 26, 2022, applied and was granted a warrant for any data associated with knife sales of the following items. And they were looking for the K-bar knife purchases, and they were even looking, amazingly, looks like on Amazon. They sent it to Amazon, and look at that, November 26th. So that's even before they knew who Bryan Kohberger was. And I wonder if, his name showed up in the returns that came back from Amazon. Because if they looked during that specific time frame, his purchase would have been on there for sure. All right, but what I think is really interesting and not talked about very much is, if you notice the dates, March 20th to March 30th is when he purchased it. And then Kohberger applies for an internship. So Kohberger applies for an internship with Pullman, Washington. And look at the date up here, April 12th, 2022. That's the date of these emails from Bryan Kohberger. He'd already sent that essay in, etc. And it says, it was a great pleasure to meet with you today and share my thoughts and excitement regarding the research assistantship for public safety. I look forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Bryan. So that's April 12th. Isn't that amazing? He didn't move. If we look at, so if you look at this screenshot right here, it says, Mr. Kohberger moved to Pullman, Washington in June of 2022. All right. Well, that means he moved to Pullman in June of 22, but he was already applying for the internship 2 months before he was there. But if you look at this date here, it's only 2 or 3 weeks after he purchased the K-bar knife. So while he's applying for the internship, he has the K-bar knife sitting in his house, and he knows he's going to be using that for a homicide. So this is all part of the plan here. None of this stuff was just sort of on the fly, let me think about, hey, look at that, there's an internship. He wanted to be in the police department working there while he was committing the murders. Like a Dexter, for example. I mean, really, really creepy stuff. And right here it said to Bryan Kohberger, they were trying to figure out times. I'm contacting you in response to your application for the doctoral level graduate research assistantship for public safety at Washington State University and your interest in working with the Pullman Police Department, blah, 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 blah. And then down here it says, I would like to schedule an approximate 45-minute online interview with you. So that would have been prior to this, and they did set up the interview, and they met, and then Kohberger emailed him back, and Kohberger did not get the internship. But isn't it interesting that even before he went to Pullman, he was looking for an internship at the police department, and the K-bar knife sheath was just sitting over there in a drawer, probably. I mean, absolutely crazy stuff. All right, so some questions to think about here. I want people to put in there. I mean, most people don't believe that the knife sheath was left there intentionally. I don't think there's any evidence either way. I think there's more evidence, however, that he left it there intentionally because it was cleaned and there was only one single source of DNA on the underside of the button snap. And why would you clean the knife sheath if you were going to be taking it with you? I think he wanted to leave it there as a calling card, Kohberger, K-bar, and then eventually, if he ever got caught, it'd be Kohberger, the K-bar killer. I think he thought of stuff like that. He's an absolute nut job. He was just trying to mimic various serial killers out there. He wasn't really like the natural-born serial killer type. He was sort of the, learning different things and wanting to do all the cool things he thought serial killers did. So let me know in the comments if you think, I think I've asked you guys this before, but maybe different people are watching. Do you think he left the knife sheath there intentionally, or was accidentally left when he had to confront Kaylee Goncalves or Xana Kernodle when she came up, startled him, and he left it there? Don't know. Yeah, so if you look at this right here, see that window right there? That is Madison Mogen's window. So again, if we open up this and you go to Madison Mogen's bedroom, which is at the top of the stairs right up in here. So if you go to the top of the stairs, you turn to the left. That window right there is the same window that you see in this video right there. All right, so that's Madison Mogen's room, and that's why I always thought Madison Mogen was the target after I visited there, because while parked right there, you can just look right into her room, where Kaylee's room is around the corner there, and even parked over there, it's still at a pretty severe angle, where from over here you can just look right into Madison Mogen's room. So something else I wanted to talk about is the importance of the K-bar knife sheath in the case. Now there's, we've gone over this exercise many times, but I want to know what more of you think. I usually say it on my live streams, and for some reason we don't have as much of an audience on the live streams. I do live streams every single night, and I don't make it into the live stream algorithm, as it were. I don't know what it is, but that's just the way it is. However, I want to know, how this case would have turned out. And there's three different possibilities with the K-bar knife. There's no K-bar knife, and you have all of the surveillance footage still would have existed. All right, so if you had all the surveillance footage, I think eventually they would have identified a suspect, Bryan Kohberger. Likely, somebody owns a white Elantra. Once they determined that it was a 2015 or so, they would have said anybody who owned a white Elantra in the general area there, Pullman and Moscow, and his name would have popped up. Then it would have shown that he would have turned his phone off, and he would have been a suspicious person at that point. And then you'd have this vehicle driving around, missing a front plate, just like his, missing a front license plate. And then they'd find him, and maybe if they got enough to get a warrant, they would have been on Amazon. They'd see that he purchased a K-bar knife, and that weapon would be consistent with the wounds. But would that be enough at that point? And I think that would be absolutely very difficult without the sheath at all to make a great circumstantial case. However, let's say the sheath was there. So let's say that's number one right there, and I think that would make it very difficult. Number two would be, let's say the sheath was there, and there's no DNA on it though. and they were able to find Kohberger again. But I think the circumstantial evidence would be huge if you consider the white Elantra driving around, missing its front plate, and the timing of his phone being off, and then his phone turning on 5 or 6 miles south of Moscow near Blaine at 4:48. And then you combine that with the Amazon searches, they would have found that he purchased the exact same make and model on Amazon in March of the same year prior to moving to Pullman, Washington. I think that would be huge circumstantial evidence. And then you combine that with all the other information that's out there, I think that would be a very strong case, and I think you could go to trial with that. Because what are the odds of that his phone is turned off, there's a white Elantra driving around missing its front plate just like his, same year range, and then a K-bar knife sheath is left on the bed, and Bryan Kohberger purchased the exact same make and model of that in March of 2022, that same year. And then you still have the Dylan Mortensen witness where she mentions a balaclava, and then it would show that he purchased a balaclava at Dick's Sporting Goods. So all of that would be very strong circumstantial case. But when you put the DNA on the knife sheath, it's just an absolute slam dunk, because when law enforcement put Bryan Kohberger's DNA, got it sequenced, and then put it through IgG or FGG, IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, or forensic genetic genealogy, and it came back with a person named Bryan Kohberger. Then they looked up Bryan Kohberger, and he lives in Pullman, Washington, and owned a white Elantra missing a front plate at the time. They must have just went, oh my God, this is insane. And then they go and find that he purchased the K-bar knife on Amazon in March of the same year, and the balaclava. I mean, it was insurmountable. That's why the probable cause document, I kept trying to tell everybody that logically, just looking at that document, Bryan Kohberger absolutely was and is the killer. Okay, he had no out, and then it just got worse for him over the years with different releases of information. It never got better at all. All right, but maybe another thing to think about would be, I think we've talked about it before, was let's say the K-bar knife was inside the bedroom and it had his DNA on it, Bryan Kohberger, but he had walked there somehow and wasn't seen on surveillance footage anywhere showing up there. I think that'd be a very weak case. That would be weaker than the K-bar knife sheath with no DNA on it and the surveillance, and you could put it all together in a very strong circumstantial case. If you don't have the surveillance footage at all, then the argument for touch DNA contamination from somewhere comes into play. However, the prosecution would then might be able to counter by saying, well, look, he turned his phone off at 2:54 in Pullman, and then it comes back on at 4:48 south of Moscow, Idaho. And then you might be able to make that argument somehow that, okay, then he went there and then killed them and left the knife sheath on the bed in some fashion, either intentionally or accidentally, and his DNA was on there. I just think that would be very weak. So I think the situation where you have a knife sheath with no DNA on it and the Elantra driving around is much more powerful than just a sheath with his DNA on it, because then the touch DNA argument of somebody just touching it becomes more into play, because there's no proof that he was even in the area other than that DNA on the sheath. So let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. So in today's video, I just wanted you to think about those various alternative possibilities that may have occurred and what you think the likelihood of solving the case would have been during those. Also, I thought it was very creepy that he already had the K-bar knife in his possession while he's writing letters, and this is before he even moved to Pullman. He's writing letters and applying for internships with the Pullman Police Department. So he wanted to make sure he was part of their program before he even went there, but it turns out that really it wasn't the case. He didn't get the job there at the Pullman Police Department, but he went there anyways, and he did what he was going to do. He just didn't have an inside way of covering things up like he had hoped. All right, everybody, thank you very much for watching today's video. Hit that like button for me. I would appreciate it, and we'll just keep updating as we get more information coming in. I'm sure Judge Hippler will be putting out a lot of documents out on the that website soon, and we'll be able to take a look at those. All right, so again, thanks for watching, and as I always say, until next time, be safe out there.